Okay, so I'll call to order this May 1st meeting of the Underhill Planning Commission. Are there any changes to the agenda? Anyone? Any public comment not related to items on this agenda?
I do have one minor addition.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can squeak in at the beginning. It should be very fast.
Well, yeah. Well, let's go for it now.
Okay. So I just forwarded this afternoon the response to our grant application.
Yeah.
I don't know if you all saw that, but
I did.
we can turn down.
Boo.
But I mean, I feel like it was a solid application. There's roughly twice as many applications as there were funds available. So, you know, there were clearly other towns whose grant applications scored higher than ours did for whatever reason. And we have other funding sources that we can apply to. It's, you know, not like we're going to stop doing what we said we wanted to do.
Yeah.
But we're just looking for some support to do it. So we'll keep at it.
Do they tell you, I'm just curious, do they tell you like where you fell so you can figure out what magic words you were supposed to put in that did not?
I can ask them for a copy of the scoring.
Yeah.
They don't offer that without.
I'm just curious. Yeah. You know, I don't know if it's like a teacher reading essays or they're like looking for certain words or whatever.
Is that the kind of thing the select board probably wouldn't want to fund if we didn't get a grant?
You'd have to ask them.
Yeah. Okay.
I suppose it would depend on, you know, how active the whole process got going and what the
what the interest was.
From
the
town,
interest from the village anyway.
I mean, there's you know other ways of getting the work done besides getting a grant. You know, for example, in my prior town planner positions, I had a fruitful relationship with professors at UVM and who placed interns with the town.
Oh.
And so, you know, I was like their boss for the period of the internship. Usually they were 1 semester projects. And, you know, depending on how much time an intern has and how motivated they are and what their skills are, which is a big variables. But if you had a real crackerjack intern who was, you know, really interested in learning about public engagement and outreach, and they had, you know, 10 or 15 hours a week to work on a project like this, they could do a lot of that. They could coordinate that kind of a project. So I'm going to follow up with that professor around fall semester internship options, make sure that we have something kind of listed as a project so that when people come in looking for internships, that they might see it and think, oh, that's something I'd like to do. You know, and you don't pay interns, you know, they're volunteers. But sometimes you get someone who's really high quality. I was actually someone who I had student who I hired as an intern from St. Michael's College about a different kind of a job 6 or 7 years ago is now the executive director of the Vermont Superintendents Association. I saw her being quoted in Digger and thought, she's really smart. I knew that.
Yeah, cool.
She's gone far.
It would be a shame if Jericho decided to go through with what they were contemplating and we missed out on that because we had no plan, I guess.
I mean, we could still go in with them on it, but you know, it would be a separate process.
Right.
Kind of an end run around the linebackers.
Right.
It's kind of weird that CCRPC is not on, right?
Yeah, I think Darren texted me and asked if people were going to physically be here or if it was going to be all remote. And I said, yeah, most people are coming to the meetings at town hall. So,
well, maybe, what do you think, Larry? Should we start talking about the ADU stuff and then shift immediately when they get on, so we don't fall behind?
Sounds good.
Okay. Does everyone have,
I have a few more copies here.
Larry's, and then David had thoughts as well.
Yeah,
obviously. So.
I did. I shared David's email, I think, or David shared his own email. And then I made one small change to the draft, which is this hard copy includes that change.
I made a copy.
Are you interested in a copy?
I read it over pretty well, but
okay. Yeah. Well, we have extras if you want.
Yeah.
It's 1 page. Oh yeah.
2 sides of 1 page.
Okay.
The things that changed since the first or second time we talked about are highlighted in yellow, so fairly few changes but they are highlighted. And so, David, your point, I think you were really looking for really embedding the 400-foot proximity for the ADU to the proximity to the principal dwelling. And I take your point that it could be strengthened. I didn't really care for the way that you drafted it, but I felt like it could be strengthened. So I actually put it in two places. It's in that item 6, which is highlighted in yellow on the first page. And then I also included a chart on the second page. I made sure that it was highlighted in this,
I'm concerned about, you know, it being a greater restriction than.
yeah, I feel like
that could be a
you know, typically the town attorney vets the draft after we've done our best with it.
Right.
And I think the town attorney will tell us if he thinks it's a problem. And if it is a problem, it's easy enough to just get rid of that piece.
Well, if we set it up in a different way, set it up so that it's part of the regulations regarding 10 or 15 acre and maybe 5 acre districts, you know, and that they, when a house is established there, that there's a parameter of 400 feet. And that would be in the general regulations and not have to do with you know, accessory dwelling unit.
Were you saying it should apply to any accessory structure?
Yeah, well, that's
just
how I originally went off in that track. But I'm thinking that it might be simpler actually to just have, in regards to the 5, 10, and 15 acre districts, the restriction that where the house is established, accessory dwellings or accessory structures would be within that 400 parameter. And that would be, you know, just a regulation for the 5, 10, and 15 acre parcels, basically. So it doesn't deal with the accessory dwelling unit specifically at all. It's a general regulation. But if you go after just the specific accessory dwelling unit, then we're getting over to the point where we can be, where we're going to be accused of being more restrictive, you know, than the state says we can be.
I wonder how people would feel about the accessories, like all accessory structures being within 400 feet. I'm trying to think about like
that seems pretty restrictive.
Storage sheds or barns even.
Yeah, right. That's
how do other people feel? No, Aaron, welcome. There, seat of honor.
Yeah, where should I go?
Or here's good. So
Wherever you prefer. We had shifted agenda items, but we're going to shift right back to yours, and then we'll shift back over. So.
Just keep going for a little bit, then I'll I get myself settled.
Yep. Well, while he gets settled, how do people generally feel about that? Making it all accessory structures versus just ADUs within 400 feet.
Well, setting it up in the districts, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of against the 400 foot thing to begin with.
Oh, I forgot. You were outvoted.
So I'm not 8 to 1, okay? I was the Lone Ranger.
8 to 1.
So I'm thinking about somebody has a long driveway, they have 100 acres, and at the bottom of the driveway, they have a field where they want to put a little shed for the cow that they're raising. I'm thinking that's, you know, then they have to go to the DRB and plead their case, or they can't even plead their case. Are we going to put another little addendum to this by saying if you want to go for a variance, I guess it would be, right? Would it be a variance?
Conditional use, I think
we started with conditional use, but I changed it in the latest draft.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like every situation could be different according to this, and that's, so when you make a law like this, it automatically shuts out the possibility that
Yeah.
somebody with a large tract of land could not do anything that they want with it. So,
Well, I've been thinking this over, and I'm not overly enthusiastic about this whole thing at all.
What whole thing?
The 400-foot parameter, which
I
I brought
thought you
in.
were a fan.
I know, I
of
brought it
400
in,
feet.
basically, but.
David, are you trying to cause me to have a stroke? All right,
His
so
idea has
let's
lost
look
its
at this
luster.
next week.
all right, so this is clearly now ballooned into a larger thing. Thank you, David. So let's shift over to CCRPC. And when you all are done, we will begrudgingly reopen this other topic.
Yeah.
In the meantime,
Yeah.
please.
Feel your
I'll save you
frustration.
from the,
Roy obviously
Planes
paid
ago.
David before the meeting, but we'll,
You're streaming up.
please, the floor is yours.
thank you folks thanks for having me. Sorry I was a little late. It took a little while to get the chickens and the goats away and fed and all that I expected. So tonight I wanted to come in person because I didn't get a chance to come last time when it was ice storming. So glad to see you all here. I feel like there's some new faces that I didn't see the last time.
So Gordon is a member of the public, and he is more here about a specific issue, I think is a fair characterization. And Zach is up for, he has applied to be on the planning commission.
Excellent.
So,
But I did attend the last meeting.
Yeah.
You were on virtually.
Great. And then maybe there was someone else absent that I didn't see. Or maybe
could have been, so Roy, David, Bart, Brian, and Tim.
Roy, David, Bart,
Brian, Tim.
Tim. Great. Good to. I'll probably get the names wrong, so
That's
apologies if I
okay,
do.
you're forgiven.
So I know it's been a couple months since I was last here to talk about Act 181 and talk about the regional plan, the housing targets, and the draft future land use map. So tonight I recognize that I put out a lot of material to you after Larry already put out the agenda and went on vacation. So I know that you might not be ready to make any decisions tonight or any recommendations. That's totally fine. So I'm happy to just have this be an informational discussion, digest what's out there, and get some feedback out on the table for CCRPC as we work on that regional plan. The things that I wanted to cover tonight in that memo, there's 3 major topics. Let me just pull that up for myself, and hopefully you've all had a chance to read it. There's the map, there's the housing targets, and there's this Tier 1B potential Act 250 exemption thing. So I wanted to walk through all those, make sure there's a chance to hear from you guys. Any thoughts, feedback on what's been put out there, anything that you've been hearing in your community that has either in response to that or thoughts on how to modify it or make it better. And then I think, we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about that Tier 1B and housing targets and infrastructure and potential for development and trying to figure out some of those big picture questions that you deal with a lot, but that may not be all resolved at once. So I'll start by saying, were there any questions right off the bat, either held over from the last time or from reading that memo, anything that I should kind of get right out there?
Anyone have any specific questions?
I just wanted, what do you call, I asked Larry this and he said, yes, an ADU is part of the,
Yes.
okay.
An ADU would count towards those housing targets, as would, I think, a rehab or of a dwelling that's been vacant or not used for that, or a commercial conversion from a commercial use. You probably see less of that here in Underhill, probably more the other direction. Yeah, anything that's going to help meet that housing goal and increase the availability of homes, whether that's small accessory units or historic rehab or even completely new units, whatever form that's in, it's totally up to Underhill as to how you want to try to reach those targets and how you want to try to help meet the needs of your community. Because the thing to remember about all of this is that it's not just about CCRPC coming in and saying, hey, we need you to help us, meet our regional housing goals and, chip in. And it's really also about making sure that the town is looking out for its own needs in a housing sense, and
Yeah.
looking at how that's going to affect other things like your road infrastructure, your water and sewer, if you have any, which you may or may not want to consider. Looking at your larger land use patterns and trying to make sure that you're able to keep that as compact as possible, recognizing that the terrain is what it is and that the opportunities for development might be limited and opportunistic. So yeah.
I mean, I had thoughts I'm happy to share unless someone else.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm struggling a little bit with it, to be honest. Well, first of all, I'm very thankful for all your help and everything. And I think that I very much agree with where they're slotting us in and sort of keeping us rural and focused on some of the forest blocks and the role that we play in that, particularly abutting Mount Mansfield.
Yeah.
I think it's super important, particularly with like the Vermont conservation design and all that other stuff, right? So I very much agree with all that. I think where I'm struggling is on three things. One is, I've been thinking about this. First, when I saw the numbers, I'm like, that's insane. And then Larry was talking about ADUs and he sort of convinced me. However, I think it seems to me there's like three ways for this to happen in Underhill. So one would be, and I think they all have challenges. One would be to really chop up our lot sizes, right? Which I think would have negative effects on all the other things we're trying to accomplish, right? With the Vermont conservation design and all that other stuff. And I also don't think that's probably why anyone moved to Underhill and it would go nowhere, right? That's my gut.
That's probably not consistent with the regional plan,
rest of
local
it,
plan,
right.
all that stuff, yeah.
Number two is we would need a wastewater system. And we've spent time on wastewater before. And I'll be frank, and you guys maybe are all smarter than me and you don't feel this way, but I found it overwhelming. And I also think like if the state's serious about that, to the extent the state cares what I think, then they should have like a group of people for a small town who essentially parachute in and say like, you want to do this? Okay, let's do it. We're going to do 90% of the work. We're going to include you. And then
Totally agree with you.
there's no other way to make it
We're not
happen.
going to do
Realistically.
it. We're not going to figure it out.
We're not going to figure it out. And also, it's super expensive. And we saw what happened in Westford. So it's like they would need to do something financially. And the third way to do it is ADUs. And I feel like this isn't, maybe you're not supposed to say this part out loud. I don't know. But if you're in Underhill, look, if you want to do short-term rentals, I honestly could care less. I don't want it to come across as like I'm anti-short-term rental. I'm pretty agnostic, frankly. But let's be real. Most ADUs that get built here are going to be short-term rentals because Smugs is right there. So if we're just pretending those are housing and that they're going to do something, I guess that's fine. But it's not real. So like that's where I'm struggling. Like if the legislature just wants to pretend like we're building housing, that's great. Okay. I'm in on that. Build a bunch of ADUs for Smugs and everyone in Underhill will make money and that's great. But like it's not doing anything, right? So I don't know. That's where I'm struggling. If they're serious about it, then it just feels like there's a couple obvious things they need to do that they're not doing. So.
One other thing I'll throw out there as another way to achieve things is you talked about a wastewater system, and I think the way you were talking about it felt more like a public system that would be, backed by the town and,
yes,
some
that's what I was referring to.
Other opportunities could exist for small community systems that are still privately maintained that aren't at the scale where the town needs to get involved, but where there's pockets of good soils, you can kind of make a small development work. And a few of those small developments add up to, what are we talking about? Underhill, we've got 6 units a year. 9 units a year. So 118 unit development every couple of years. That adds up. Not suggesting that is the best way. Sorry, that's your historic growth.
Our mid number is 282.
Right. And the other thing,
141 is our low number.
Right.
I was looking at the annual growth that you've been doing. And trying to slot that into the mid-range 2050, which is 11 for you. So it's important to remember that those small bits do add up, and that can be a combo of ADUs and other smaller subdivisions and developments. You can also look at multi-units, potentially, up to 4 units, not anything huge, in those village centers, probably more in Underhill Flats, Riverside. But something like old historic, conversion of a historic home that ends up as a duplex or a 3-unit could really, add up. I was gonna say something else.
Yeah, sorry,
So,
I didn't mean to come across as opposed or negative. It's
No,
like,
it's-
I've been
these are real
thinking about
questions.
this for a week, and I just kept coming back to like, are they serious or is this performative? Because like it feels like a couple of the pieces for it to be serious, like just aren't there.
It's interesting that you bring up that ADUs and the risk of them getting mostly or primarily short-term rentals, because yesterday Darren and I were both at a fairly large group gathering in Burlington, which was a housing convening. And the purpose of it was to foster the audience or the participants were people who work in municipal planning, people who work as developers, people who work in affordable housing organizations, and architects. And I was sitting at a table with an architect and 2 major players in the local affordable housing nonprofit community, and a town planner from Winooski, a housing specialist from Winooski, and a housing specialist, citizen from Heinsberg. And we had pretty universal agreement on a couple of ideas related to ADU. So one was that short-term rentals are a problem, and that a very strong policy controls over ADU conversions into short-term rentals, and any conversions of housing into short-term rentals was appropriate and timely in Vermont, given how much of our rental housing stock has been converted into short-term rentals, and that there should be some affordability criteria built in when the state is giving out grant money for building wastewater systems to help communities build wastewater systems or to help communities build housing. Because, I mean, on the one hand, I think my response to you when we talked about it last was apt. We need all kinds of housing. But on the other hand, the real crunch is in the missing middle, working class, more affordable units. That's where the market is not providing the units, period, anywhere in Vermont now. So with a few exceptions. I mean, Burlington has done it. And part of the reason why is because Burlington has an inclusionary housing ordinance. So they say, if you're going to build multifamily housing, 20% of the units have to be affordable to people at whatever 60% or 80% of the
varies depending.
Yeah.
But a developer can buy out of that, right?
They can, but most don't. Most find a way to make it work, and they have to increase the price of the market rate units in order to do it. But in the end, you end up with 20%. And, like for Cambrian Rise, the project on North Avenue on the former Catholic Diocese property, I mean, that's 700 plus units of housing total. So 20% of 700 plus is a lot of units that we didn't have otherwise that are going to be permanently affordable. Some of it's elder housing, some of it's for low-income folks. So, there's an emerging consensus that would really regulate how the state wants to spend or will spend its subsidy for the kinds of housing that it's calling for in these targets. And, Underhill can certainly say, we accept the target, maybe the mid-range target, but we also want to see the state step up and provide resources, and also require that the units are built for people with different income levels and are accessible and affordable to people with different income levels. Because what we don't want, I think, none of us want, I would think in Vermont, very few people want to see limited state subsidies going to build more houses for wealthy people from out of state. That's not going to help anything.
Right.
So, but
Go ahead.
how do you, ADUs are just single units basically. So,
Right.
How can you say, we'll do 20% basically?
Oh, you can't. You can on a local level.
Right.
I'm talking about how the state directs its limited resources.
Yeah.
And regional planning might have something to do with that too. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'd say, when it comes to ADUs, I think, for Underhill, it's going to be maybe a bigger portion of your housing stock in general and your, ability to meet your housing goal than it would be in some other towns where they're looking at more of that, multi-unit mixed use, or even some, market rate singles and duplexes. I think something else that often gets forgotten about ADUs, even for short-term rentals, is that can be providing income for someone in Underhill who otherwise may not be able to afford to live here. It's not always the case. A lot of it is luxury. A lot of it is, someone taking advantage of that tourism industry, but it can help maintain affordable housing for that main unit if they're renting out the ADU. So it's still an important part of the mix. But the other thing I was going to mention is that, as Larry was talking about, there's, scale of 700 units happening in Burlington. And I think, Brian, you mentioned just the total number seems like a lot, and the reality is that it is a lot. So I want to kind of dial back and look at the low, mid, and high for all of our communities and for Chittenden County and kind of put those in perspective. So we were given those low and high range targets from the state housing needs assessment. We put a mid range in just so we could kind of talk about one number and not think too much variable. The low range target was set up as a scenario of kind of meeting our bare minimum housing needs over the next, they had 2030 as well as 2050. So we're talking 5 to 25 years. The idea behind that is that if we continue the way we're going, we're going to keep seeing the same patterns in the market. We're going to keep seeing the shortage. We're going to see inflation. We're going to see lack of availability, lack of choice. And the people who suffer from that the most are those at the low end. They get shut out. We see more homelessness. We see inability to bring skilled labor into the state and into our workforce, not have enough workforce to build more housing. It's a vicious cycle. We also see the loss of students in schools, which then increases property taxes. It's kind of this perfect storms problem. So that low target is saying, you know what, we really have to up it a little bit to get even to that bare minimum recovery of where we should have been if we've been producing things all along. That high target is kind of a best case scenario. We solve all of these challenges that we've been faced with. We build some resilience into the market so that, let's say we don't quite meet that, we're still going to be in good shape. We're still not going to be in a housing crisis by 2050. So that mid-range is meant to be a realistic middle ground between those two. But I'd say, even in some of our communities, it might be somewhere between that low and mid. And it might vary based on which community and based on what availability you have to put more housing in. And the last thing to mention is that we tried to treat everyone fairly and equitably and equally as we could with all of these factors in mind. So grouping Underhill into that rural category, you ended up getting a target that is more reflective of what you've been doing in the past, with recognition that we don't even necessarily want to increase substantially the rate of housing development in these rural communities. There's going to be some, and we're going to have to do some to catch up to where we need to be in that low range. But we are trying to direct a lot more of the growth to the other communities that can accommodate things more. So my point with all this is to say, these are goals. This is sort of something to aim for and something to think creatively of, like, what are the opportunities that we could take advantage of? What are the things that we would need in order to make that happen? And wastewater is one. Maybe some policy change and some state investment could be another. So part of that future land use map work and some of that Act 250 Tier 1B work is putting a few things in place to help meet those housing targets. But there's other things that we might not be able to think of, especially for small communities and rural communities in places where that opportunity, the larger scale opportunities are more limited. And so we're looking for information and feedback from you on what could work or what has worked in the past and what hasn't worked in the past. As far as the parachuting in and being able to help with a wastewater system, that is something that regional planning commissions are, like, that's our bread and butter. That's what we definitely are here to help with. We did all that work in Westford, and so we can do something similar in Underhill if there's interest. But as you saw with what happened in Westford, we want to make sure that the community buy-in
first.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't want everyone to put time and effort into that if it's not going to really be something that the community wants to support. And I think things also can be interesting, I'll say, complicated perhaps, with your shared village center with Jericho. And I know there's some questions about what's happening just over that town line. But I wonder if there's opportunities to continue collaboration as you've had in the past, and maybe look collectively at Underhill and Jericho, because Jericho's trying to do some ambitious stuff. They're actually looking at housing targets that are above what we've put in for in this press release in these numbers. So maybe there's ways to say, if there's not as much capacity on the other Underhill side, maybe Jericho steps in and you still work together to find ways to finance things or to, support that administrative side of stuff so that you both reach the targets together that you might not otherwise be able to do alone. And that's it's a little bit of a all for one for all approach with this stuff.
You've got one major obstacle in the ADUs, and that is the road agreement, the road regulations.
Yep.
If you're putting an ADU in at the end of a long driveway into the house there, and the driveway is maybe not quite up to what the town is specifying.
Yep.
To make it okay for two, you have to upgrade that whole road basically. If you've got 4 units on a private road, it just becomes totally big obstacle and a blockage basically.
Yeah. No, I had the same problem when I was working in Essex. It was like, okay, so we've got one house on the driveway. We're going to allow a second house on the driveway. That's fine.
Yeah.
Then with the Home Act, that becomes up to 4 houses, 2 duplexes, maybe some ADUs in the mix. It is difficult and challenging.
Yeah.
The other thing I think we're, oh, go ahead.
No, I would hope that we could relax our regulations for ADUs. Maybe have it at 50% of what a primary dwelling would be. I don't know.
For a road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the road
Yeah,
upgrade.
because for 4 units, you need a 20-foot road. For 2, you need a 12-foot road. And up at
Yeah.
3, you need a 14-foot wide road. So,
Yeah. We'll have to think about it all and figure out something that might be acceptable.
And one of the reasons for those road standards is emergency access. Making sure that the fire truck can get up there, because the more units and structures you've got on that driveway, more likelihood of if something does happen and you need to get there, the risk just becomes higher, and that actually affects the town's bottom line in terms of your insurance ratings. So it's an important consideration, but there's maybe other ways that a homeowner or the developer, whoever's involved in that, can say, I'm mitigating my risk in other ways so that we don't have to worry about upgrading the road. Like maybe it's sprinklers, maybe it's a pond or whatever.
right.
Well, that's a good
The
idea.
one-
Yeah.
The one I see a couple drawbacks to some of this. The one I see is that in the village centers, there's literally not a single parcel that could be developed into even one house probably. And then the houses that exist, there's no way they're going to be able to upgrade their septic system to accept an ADU probably. Maybe they could put in a $50,000, septic system, but I don't even think they're allowed to do that according to the state regulations, right?
Right.
Because so
Another challenge, state regulations maybe
Yeah.
need to change to be a little more flexible.
So as far as development in the Act 250 exemption, I don't think that would ever apply here unless we had a wastewater treatment system for the village centers. And but there's still no developable land if you look at the parcel map. And then expanding the village center, we could extend the village center out Browns or River Road, right? Probably there is land there that could.
Well, that's what we were talking about, but it's all farmland.
And
Yeah.
it's, and I don't know if you could extend it right to Underhill Center, I guess, if you look at all the land that's there. But I think there would be a lot of pushback from the people in town. And then the third problem I see is if you were to say, okay, well, we have the rural residential, which is 3 acres, right? So if you have a 10-acre lot in there, you could subdivide it into 2 other lots plus your house probably, which
in where?
Under rural residential, because it's 3 acre zoning.
Yeah.
That's like Irish Settlement Road, Poker Hill Road.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of living. You're not going to take a 3 acre lot and split it into 2 lots. It's
Well,
not.
not all of Irish is rural residential though, is it? I thought part of it was in the scenic.
Yeah, maybe. I had to look at the map. But, and then there's the scenic preservation.
Scenic
It's
preservation.
10 acre
It's
zone,
10.
right? That's most of Pleasant Valley Road.
I thought a lot of Irish, it's hard to do this without referencing people's names, but that not everyone knows. But I thought from Matt Colin's house north was probably all
Yeah, maybe
in
it
the,
is.
in the scenic preservation district.
Right.
I mean, it all has great views, which is sort of how that thing was designed.
Right.
So I have to assume it is.
Yeah. But if you were to approach the town with the thought of maybe taking that 10 acre zoning and turning it into 5 acre zoning, I think there'd be a lot of pushback with that also. So,
Well, that was one of my 3 points. I just don't think people would be in favor of that.
right.
So let's talk a little bit about the map, because that was one of the things I wanted to check in about. And I know that what we've shown on this map it is pretty limited in terms of those village centers and village areas. And I was wondering how that would feel for this community, both in terms of like, oh great, we want to keep things small, we want to keep things compact, lots of green on the map, but also it limits development opportunities, and sort of makes it hard to square that with the housing targets. So I guess the question is, do you see other ways that those village centers could be expanded? And I recognize, as I was driving, I was like, yeah, all of it's farmland and you want to keep that. And I wonder if there's ways that Underhill could see, one, potentially seeing some development opportunities in very limited spots close into the village so that you're not sprawling in that farmland, because going from 10 acre to 5 acre, it's really just going to end up with a bunch of extra houses, half the distance along the road, and it's not really going to create that compact settlement that you're looking for, and preserve the farmland and the more open land that you're trying to keep that way. So I think what we'd encourage you to think about is, opening up small pockets where there's opportunity close to the villages, if those exist, and they probably do in limited spots. And maybe it is a matter of some larger parcels that exist there being able to get a little smaller, but only a few parcels outside the existing pink areas in the map here.
I think
it seems to me like the logical thing to do would be maybe to change our PRD regulations to make it more easier to put a PRD in. So if somebody has 100 acres and they want to subdivide it, they want to build, theoretically they could build 10 houses on it if they had the road frontage. But we could ease up on the I want your input on this, but ease up on the PRD regulations to allow that person to put in 10 houses on 2 acres each and then leave the rest open. I mean, that seems like
cluster development.
Yeah, but that would all be rural. It's not going to be near the village center, right?
Yeah. Well, I think,
I'm feeling on PRDs, I think they're ugly, basically.
Yeah.
You have a piece of property, really what people like to do is put a house that fits into that particular lot, basically. And that's an aesthetic thing.
Yeah.
Aesthetics are important. They create a good feeling about everything. You crowd everything together and you look out your window into the neighbor's kitchen and so on. I don't really like that idea.
Yeah, but there's a PRD Jackson right up the hill road here on Pleasant Valley Road that was nicely done. And then there's one
that's not
Maple.
a PRD. That's.
Oh, I think that's a PRD.
But isn't it a little weird to push
No, the
development?
PRD is down on Brown's Trace, on the left-hand side. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 houses around a circle, basically.
On Brown's Trace.
The one that's up opposite Carol and Gregson's, those are separate lots, basically. They're separate lots, and the houses are placed
maybe you're right.
separately.
But the only PRD I can think of in town is up off of Maple Leaf Road. It's the Wheeler Road up there, and that's kind of nicely done. And they left 80 acres open. So that's what I'm talking about. Everybody in that little development has like 3 acres or something, but 80 acres was left open. That was the Montgomery property. So that's what I envision, like to try to accomplish these goals. I'm not saying I like that. I'm for it,
Well,
but
then let's not do it. if we don't like it.
Conflicts with the town plan.
Let's not do it if we don't like it.
Yeah, it just kind of conflicts with the town vision and the town plan.
yeah. I mean, I don't know how everybody else at the table feels about PRDs, but it seems like and you can do it in town. You just have to go through the process of doing it.
I mean, that's my main, what I'm really struggling with to get to these numbers or what I talked about, but it's more than that. It's like, it feels like, by the way, I don't think this would apply if you were in Burlington. I feel like if I was saying this in Burlington, there would be like 17 counterpoints and I would be wrong.
Yeah, right.
But here, it feels like the easy pickings, for lack of a better term, are gone.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
All the 10-acre lots, those are gone, almost all. Right?
Yeah.
So then to get to your number, it seems like you have to either sacrifice being a rural town, which is Vermont Conservation Design, which we've all sort of agreed, and the plan says is not our goal, right? Not just our plan, CCRPC's plan, right?
and state planning goals.
Yes, state planning goals, or you need to find a way to make development dense using public money to support it, like a wastewater system or something like that. Because I just going up and chopping up, I see what you're saying. It's better that they're together, but you're still going out and chopping up 100-acre parcels.
Yeah, they're still going to be far out on those roads.
Believe me, what I would prefer is that when that person who wants to subdivide that land they're old and they want to move on in life, they want to make their money, that some wealthy person comes along and buys it, and it continues on as the same.
Or
we can continue to hike and bike on.
Or maybe they want to keep it as a farm. Right. Exactly, like that's part of the. Like I just feel like it's. I don't know. I'm not doing a good job describing it. I feel like it's not our place to tell someone who loves that they have a farm, like, hey, you sure you don't want to do a PRD? Or?
Well, I think Roy just did a nice job.
I'm not saying you're saying that, but
running through a number of the options that we have. And I guess my response to that is that's all great. There are probably other tools that we could add to that list. But I think the reason Darren's here and the reason this is coming up now is because you have to start somewhere in the process of bylaw reform if we're going to get to higher housing targets, if we're going to ever reach those. And yes, you can change the bylaws. Yes, you can change the shape of the zoning districts. Yes, you can change the density. But that would all follow from a decision, which is a policy decision, is like, do we need more housing? And the presumed answer, the assumption here behind all these targets is yes, we need a lot more housing. But then the question would be, once we settle on a target, then we know how the rules would have to change to accommodate that target. And there is a very large toolbox of different strategies, including the ones you ticked off, that would enable some of that housing to happen in Underhill.
And you've got that in your town plan already.
Yeah.
You need for more housing and asking these questions. And I want to make sure we all know that we're not going to solve all those problems tonight, and we're not going to solve them even in 5 years. But I think, kind of like Larry said, is we're kind of putting that vision out and saying, here's kind of where we want to be, the scale of what we're trying to achieve, what tools do we need to bring into play, what plans and what considerations do we need to put in motion, and conversations do we need to start in the community to start to answer those questions. Like, is it better to do PRDs in the rural, part of town? Is that the solution that works best for everyone? Or is it trying to do something in the village centers? Or is it trying to do it all ADUs? Putting those options out and sort of feeling how it works and what's practical is the work that's going to happen after we go through this regional plan adoption process. And then next time you update your Underhill town plan, you might start to look at some of those questions and say, how can we start to solve that? And it's okay if you don't have all the answers by 2030. We're just trying to get us there by 2050. That's our focus. Anything that is in that 2030 target, if it's not already in development in the process, it's probably not going to be part of that range. So I guess to kind of go back to the map, and one part of things that we haven't talked about as much, although we've referenced it, it sounds like there's some concern that what we have on the map right now is pretty limited. And I know we got you guys have other stuff to talk to about, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But would it be safe to say that some feedback to CCRPC is maybe expand those village area boundaries a little bit, see if there's development opportunities that we could capture in that? Because the whole point of these maps and this designation, or this Act 181 process, is to try to bring more opportunities to those places where development can happen. It doesn't make sense for us to say, let's catch all the areas that are already developed and the easy pickings are gone. It's not going to do anything for anybody. So I think the question then becomes, how far out do you want to go, and how much do you want to capture? And maybe that's something that we can talk about at a future date, or I can throw some ideas out to Larry and he can float them to you, or but I guess what I'm hearing is maybe we can do a little more than what we've shown on this map. And I'm thinking specifically going out Poker Hill Road a bit, Poker Hill Road, right? Is that it? Going out, continuing on 15 and then taking the right at the river.
Yeah, that's Poker Hill.
Okay, just making sure.
But even when you do that and you know how big the lots out there are, it's not like they can be easily turned into a 3 or 4 unit subdivision.
No, we're not necessarily talking subdivision. We're talking maybe adding on to existing homes, or having a second house on a single lot, having some of those be rentals potentially, or owner lives in one, rents out the others. So there's lots of options that could exist there. And yeah, the scale of what's going to happen is going to be more like, they get an upgrade to their septic system in order to accommodate that extra development, maybe through a state grant. And that's what these land use designations might bring, is that state investment through the community investment program, formerly a downtown program where you've got your village center benefits. It opens up opportunities for both property owners on the private sector and stimulates that private sector development, as well as some opportunities for the town to do some wastewater studies or to look at road upgrades potentially. We're trying to basically say, of the state's limited investment, here's where we want it to go, not to the rural parts of town where we don't really want a whole lot going on anyway.
Right. Is anyone opposed to Darren coming back, or CCRPC coming back with some ideas?
Oh, no way. That's great.
Sure. Yeah, and we have talked in earlier meetings about the expansion of the village district, specifically in the flats area, because it is very narrowly drawn right now.
Yeah.
I shared the screen here with anyone who might want to watch the recording later, but this dark purple area on the map is the current village district as it's defined in our zoning. It's really very limited. And so I think I just heard Darren say was, CCRPC might say, well, what about potentially pushing out the boundaries of that as a planning zone without requiring Underhill to actually make any changes in our zoning for now. But just for the sake of discussion, just envision if it would give us space in the regional planning context, if we decided later on that we did want to push out the village district boundaries in the Flats district or in Underhill Center district, that we had the latitude to do that from the standpoint of regional planning. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yeah, and I'll just point out, I'm sorry, I'm not in the GoToMeeting, so I can't share this, but I might be able to get in there. Either way, I'll just sort of show around the room. This is what you have for your current zoning. That pink area for your village, I can't remember if you call it village center or village area, is much bigger than what we put in, mostly because we were trying to follow some state criteria for how we draw these lines, trying to make sure that it follows walkability and that it's not going too far out of that village center area. But we went what I'm thinking is we maybe went a little narrow with Underhill, so we can go out a little bit more and try to capture some of these lots and maybe some of those spots on Poker Hill Road. The center, Underhill Center, I think we went as far as we could at a base level, but I think there's certainly a few more opportunities that we could look at. We just didn't want to go beyond what your zoning already says. So.
Yeah, and part of it, Darren, is that under the second next topic you're going to talk about is the Act 181 designations, and there's already like an interim allowance for going up to a quarter mile out from your existing village district boundaries.
Yep.
And that actually, it makes a lot of sense because Darren just mentioned what's walkable to the village center, and a quarter mile from outside into the village center seems like, generally speaking, assuming you can walk safely on the roads, which may not always be the case in all weather or all times of year. But generally speaking, if you're a kid and you live in a house that's inside a quarter mile radius of the village center, your parents might let you walk to school if there's a safe way to do that without worrying about getting run over, because it's a 10 or 15 minute walk, right?
Yep.
That's how I grew up. And that's how many of us grew up, is, being within walking distance of our elementary schools. And that's kind of an ideal in terms of building community. So, that lever is already there as a planning option if we choose to take it.
Yep. So yeah, we could look at those interim exemption areas as maybe the general boundaries of where we might want to explore expanding those village center and village area designations on the regional map, which then opens up the possibility of investment potentially for sidewalks, for walkability, as well as these housing options. But it also opens up more opportunities for that interim Act 250 exemption for housing development to be continued permanently through Tier 1B, which is basically a permanent version of the interim exemptions. What it would mean is that development projects up to 50 units of housing on 10 acres or less would be exempt from Act 250. They'd still go through a local review process. They'd still have to get all their state permits for wetlands and septic and VTrans, Road 1111 permits. But all they would need to do from a land use perspective is say, hey, we are consistent with the Underhill zoning regulations. Underhill has said this is an area where we know we want to grow to some extent, and we're not worried about the, land use impacts, the, need for more, road service or, school impacts, or we've already said it's consistent with our housing targets. We're planning for that in other ways. So here's fine. Anywhere outside of that, we might still want Act 250 to evaluate a larger project. And when I say up to 50 units, that's the statutory sort of maximum, but what's more likely in Underhill is probably something in that 5 to 15 or 20 unit range maximum for a given project, just because, like you said, the lots are only so big. They're only going to subdivide or develop based on what your zoning allows.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an opportunity for Underhill to say, hey, we want to advance this, and here's a tool that we can use to make it easier where those opportunities exist. We're looking at other tools as well. So that's the question for you. Not necessarily that you have to answer tonight, but is that something that Underhill would be interested in having, that exemption from Act 250 in these areas? Yeah. If so, we'd want to work with your select board to kind of have that memorialized and formalized. And then CCRPC would go to the land use review board, and when we get our regional plan approved, and say, this is where Underhill wants that exemption.
Well, it sounds like step one, correct me if I'm wrong, everyone, is to see your ideas on the village center map.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. Because it's exemptions only in the village center.
It's in the village center and village area, so the purple and pink on the map.
Okay.
So anywhere that is within that is eligible. You don't have to apply the Act 250 Tier 1B exemption to all of your eligible areas, but you can't apply it to an area that's not in one of those categories.
Okay.
So yeah, step one,
okay,
look at slightly bigger boundaries for the village area probably.
Okay.
So you can get back to us on updating the map according to what we talked about tonight.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think there might be a
thank
few
you.
iterations of that. We're going to be continuing to take public comment on the maps and all of this until May 19th.
Okay.
We probably won't update the region-wide map until after that, but I might share some drafts with you just as a static version and say, does that seem right? And maybe Larry can run this by you at another meeting for feedback.
Yep.
Okay.
So this
All right.
isn't something that the state has to approve.
Yeah, so short version of the process is that this is our regional plan that we're trying to get approved, and we have to do all of these land use categories and specifics in our regional plan. We then have to go to the state to get that confirmed, essentially the way your local plan is approved, is confirmed by CCRPC. It's an added step for us, but it's because that's going to sort of pull together all of these different elements that previously were separate.
Okay, so you have the regional plan has to go to the state. It wouldn't be us.
Correct.
The state, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're required to get your buy-in on exemption areas just because we don't want to do that without your, consent and approval.
Right.
But we're doing the regional plan map and the housing targets. We kind of have to do that regardless, but we are trying to make sure that we're doing it right so that it doesn't come as a shock or doesn't feel like we're throwing a number out at you that you're like, this doesn't make any sense. So.
Yeah. I got one more question about the ADUs. Has the state actually looked at the possibility that that market is going to become so saturated that people won't be able to rent them because there's so many available? Because I think I could see that happening in Underhill, because right now there's going to be 5 built on my road, just on one road in town. So if you multiply that by 10 years, and there's like 100 new ADUs in town that people can't rent. Has there been anybody looking at that?
Not really, because it hasn't there hasn't been enough statewide development of ADUs statewide to kind of get close to saturate that market, and it really is a niche market. I don't think, as much as you're talking about it here, I think it wouldn't be realistic for Underhill to rely on ADUs to meet your housing goals entirely, because you're right, it would saturate the market. Not everyone wants a small hole attached to someone else.
Yeah, and also maybe you can't answer this, but have some rural towns like Underhill actually limited the ADU rental?
Short-term rentals?
Short-term rentals?
Yes.
Rural towns haven't as much, but some of them have.
Yeah, I have a report on that I can share if people are interested. I mentioned it today when I worked in Charlotte. There are definitely rural towns that have enacted some restrictions on ADUs. Most of them require short-term rentals to register with the town, and then some of them tax short-term rentals as well. And some of them, like Woodstock, for example, had a moratorium on adding short-term rentals. That they would not approve any short-term rentals coming into existence for a while. They've since relaxed that, but just closer by, Morristown has rules about
I remember reading about that.
and they tax them as well. So it tends to be in communities that are closer to resorts, frankly, close to ski areas, but not exclusively so.
And Roy, what's your knowledge on the ADUs that are being built on your road?
Just talking to my neighbors.
Are they going to do the short-term rentals, or are they going to be long-term rentals?
I couldn't say for sure, but and talking to Justin Willis, to cite it, the engineer who did my engineering for my ADU, he told me that he had done 5 on the road in the last year.
Right.
So I'm like, wow, really 5? And that's just a drop in the bucket when you look at all the other neighborhoods
Right.
in town.
That was a big question, just as far as the economics on just a long-term rental for an ADU. Is that even a big return on investment of the cost of building that? If it's not a short-term rental,
Right.
I'd be skeptical that you'd even be interested in doing that for a viable return on investment.
Right.
Well, if it's okay with everyone, those are all great questions and perfect place to pick up, because I think if it's okay with you, Darren, I think Gordon's here and we're running a bit behind and we have to get to executive session tonight.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay.
So I'm going to move us over to Sawmills, if that's okay.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
And we are
We're getting
gonna-
vary on timing of when to get stuff to you, because we're scheduled to go to your select board on the 22nd, but that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Darren, very much.
Yeah, thanks. It was great.
Yeah,
thanks.
Appreciate it.
But to make sure we have executive session tonight, which we have to get to, let's kick ADUs to next meeting, if it's okay with everyone. Because we're not going to have time and Gordon's here. So let's go to Sawmills. Everyone good with that?
Yeah.
ADUs go to next meeting. Okay. Thank you again, Darren. Very much.
Yeah, sorry, I think we could have budgeted a little more time, but we'll try to get that another time. You guys have a lot to cover tonight.
Yeah, you're not, well, don't worry. You'll be seeing plenty of us, I'm sure. So. You'll be sick of us.
Oh, no worries.
Hey,
You're fine.
Darren, you guys are putting together these maps and thinking about targets. Are you also looking at infrastructure and roads and doing like planning, just like thinking about traffic patterns and how the roads are going to be built out based on where you're located?
Yeah, roads haven't been as big a part of it, but infrastructure in general, absolutely. Take a look at the memo and some of the information on housing targets to see how we put that stuff together.
Awesome. Did that answer your, sort of?
I just don't want to go into all the detail because I know Brian, you're trying to keep things moving. Yes, we can talk after or follow up after.
You going upstairs now?
I'm just gonna close down and take some notes, but
Oh, is it?
No, you
select
can
board
stay.
meeting or-
No. Upstairs is this info meeting on the bridge and the new truck.
Okay.
we'll stick around for a little bit.
Yeah,
And
please.
that's what made me think of my question, because there's $1 million bridge that they're talking about.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Right? This is a small one.
That's where the state investment hopefully comes.
Well, thank you for staying. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, Sawmills. I have a question to open Sawmills, Larry. Does this draft incorporate that email from Charlie that he sent?
Charlie.
Van Winkle, remember he sent us that big, super detailed email? Do you feel like this incorporates
I think
that?
it does, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he felt that the definitions were a little unclear, so I had to tweak those a bit to really try to separate, to make sure it was clear that wood processing operations and sawmills are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And he also felt like there were some questions about enforceability that we needed to think about, and I agreed with him. And I said that, especially any type of change of use once somebody has a permit is problematic because it requires a certain level of monitoring and follow-up with the town, and that enforcement of noise can be problematic. And then Bart also had some suggestions. He did some research and handed it up to me at the end of our last discussion. And that was also helpful because he was really thinking about use standards and especially restricting hours of operation. I thought there were some very helpful suggestions in there, so I incorporated that into the new draft. Explicitly saying not just that the DRB can restrict hours of operation, but that is something that they will always have to look at when they're doing a conditional use review for a wood processing operation. Because it seems like other towns that have regulated those kinds of uses always that seems to be a friction point in terms of impact on neighboring properties, and so I put that into this draft. Let me bring it up so people can see it on screen. Okay, here we go.
Did people have, we go around the table real quick and then obviously give you a chance as well.
I don't.
Okay.
I'm just
I
here
don't know
for, if you guys have any
okay.
questions or
Okay.
like
Got it.
distances or stuff like that.
Thank you.
And then I actually did have one or two questions, but during your meetings,
Okay.
I'm just here kind of just to.
No,
That's key.
we'll get to your questions. Tim, I'm just gonna go around the table. Tim, do you have thoughts on this? Not put you on the spot.
Nothing on the highlighted items that also make any sense for me.
Okay. So are you in general good with this? I'm trying to find the right words, but you feel comfortable with it?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Bart,
Overall, yes, but
overall, you're comfortable with it? Yeah.
overall,
Okay, but
but
you
I
have
do
comments.
have some, D1 require a minimum setback distance of 300 feet from any residential lot line. I think I could go maybe 200 feet, but not 300. Also, what's important there is that somebody's house where they're going to hear it is important, not so much, and their house is probably not right on their lot line.
So you want the measurement to be
So-
to a house, not
Yes.
to a lot line.
Exactly. Because if their house is on the other end of their lot, there might be 500-600 feet between them.
I understand what you're saying. You can come up with it where it's a 10-acre lot and you live on the opposite side of the 10 acres. And you can,
Yeah. But the 90 decibels is fine, and the hours of operation are fine. So those are my thoughts.
David, do you have comments?
Yeah, I thought it's about as good as we could do, except I'm agreeing with Bart on the 300 foot, just 300 feet from the residential lot line.
You feel
I think it would
like
be-
identical comment to Bart?
Yeah, yes.
200 feet from a residence? Bart said 200 feet from a residence, not from a residential lot line.
Well, okay, but you're saying here that it's 300 feet from any residential lot line.
But Bart would like to change it to 200 feet from a residence, I think is what Bart is saying.
Oh,
Yeah, I like that better.
Just from a residence, 200 feet from a
Yeah.
residence?
For example, in Facein, they have a setback of 50 feet.
Jeez.
from the lot line.
Oh.
Not from a house, but just from the lot line.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I'm not advocating.
That's aggressive.
That's
That's a fancier town than Underhill too, right?
And it's Facein right next to Sugar Bush.
Yeah,
So.
right.
Yes.
I guess my
Well, 2 seconds, and then wait, is that it, David?
Well, so we're doing away with the lot line setback.
Well, we haven't decided anything yet. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to aggregate everyone's comments.
I like it from.
So, but you're saying you want it to be from the lot line or from the residence?
No, I think that it's okay with the required setbacks as they stand, basically. Like, for accessory structures, shall be 50 feet away or whatever, basically. So that it could be up to the present setbacks that are required. And then also, maybe 200 feet or 300 feet, whatever, from a residence.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That it would be subject to the existing setbacks for an accessory
Yeah,
structure,
Right.
plus it would be 200 feet
Yeah.
from a residence.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I wouldn't
yeah.
want it right next to, just
Yeah.
right next to the boundary, that's almost somebody looking at it and saying, just right next to my boundary, basically. You know how people would get about that.
Would it be subject automatically to any setbacks under the accessory structure, or would we need to address that?
Well, let's not conflate structures with.
No, because it's
The
not a
usage.
structure,
It's not,
so, yeah.
So sawmills do typically, and I think it's clarified a little bit in the slight changes to the definitions on the first page, but sawmills typically have permanent structures. They're permanent facilities. Wood processing operations may or may not have some accessory structures like a shed or, garage storage for equipment or what have you. But that's not really important to what we're talking about here. What the key issue is the use. We're trying to regulate the use and require it to get a conditional use permit, which gives neighbors an opportunity to weigh in and discuss potential impacts on their residences, on their property. And the conditional use review is a process that gives neighbors rights
Right.
and a voice in making that decision, as opposed to having it just be something that the ZA issues a permit for and it just happens. But there are carve-outs, there are exemptions, the 2-week time frame and the other time limits in here. If it's just for a few days, we're not going to make someone come in and get a conditional use permit. So, we don't want to restrict people's ability to operate portable wood processing operations as an income generating activity if it's just going to be a temporary nuisance to the neighbors. What we're looking at here is a situation where someone comes in and brings in equipment and sets up shop and is doing this for weeks at a time, months at a time, in close proximity to their neighbors without their neighbors having a voice.
But it sounds like where we're landing then is maybe we're adding something, possibly, which is a setback.
Yes.
Were we to do what Bart said and were we to do what David has also said, we would then need 2 numbers: a setback from the lot line,
Right.
because it's not covered by accessory structures,
Yes.
and a setback from the residence.
Yes.
Okay. Is that correct? Am I understanding it correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Roy?
I like the setback from the neighbor's house more so than
And the lot line?
I think that's not as relevant, maybe.
Yeah.
Because the neighbor's house could be 500 feet away.
Right.
So,
Okay.
but, just
Yeah,
the
what
fact
else
that
were you gonna
it's
say?
all conditional use and the neighbor's going to have some say no matter what, I think that's the most important aspect of what we're doing here. So, right?
The conditional use part
Yeah,
is the
I
most
mean,
important, right? Because it gets reviewed and the
Yeah,
neighbor comes
has
in and you
gets to
should
come in and say how they feel about
Okay.
it all.
And then the DRB gets to decide
Yeah,
if they want to set conditions
Right.
to protect the neighbors'
Right.
property interests.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
peace of mind.
Are
Yeah,
you,
we're
sorry, David.
We're sort of pushing things off to conditional use and saying, that, because, some people will come in and say, I don't want it, period. Allowing, I don't know if there's any way to limit this person that says nothing is allowed, period.
I mean, they have the right to come in and say that to the DRB,
They
and then the
say it, but
DRB
then-
will make their
Yeah, then the
decision, right?
DRB has to have some kind of standards. I don't know if they can do it really.
We're trying to give them standards here.
I
Yes.
know. I think
And-
it's good if you can do
And, right now the legislature is actively discussing limiting the appeal rights of neighbors.
Yeah.
I just read that today, their current draft of the
For everything,
House.
you mean? Or?
Yes.
Oh.
Wait,
Yeah.
our DRB is?
No, the
No, the
state.
state legislature is thinking about changing appeal rights under permits for the whole state.
Oh, that's,
And so, there's been a lot of discussion about people filing spurious appeals because they just don't like something, even though it might have no impact on their property or the property values. And that ties up the courts, and it ties up, property owners who want to do something, change their property, build things. So, the governor's team has pushed that actively, and the House bill incorporates significant restrictions over the current.
that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, it's not in anyone's interest to litigate endlessly.
Yeah.
It costs towns money, it costs property owners money, it costs the appellants money, and, just the lawyers walk away rubbing their hands, and everybody else is frustrated because it takes 3 years to make a decision. And that, it's a lose-lose, basically. So we want to have regulations that are pretty straightforward, and we want to limit appeal rights, I think, because that's what the legislature is where they're going anyway.
Have to look at the language of that.
Sure.
I know Gordon has, did you have a thought you wanted to share on this? Where?
You don't have. Is there a time frame that that this sort of thing would be approved for? Like, it sounds like it's temporary, but
Not forever.
No, this is a permanent change to the land use regs, and it would be up to, we have to hold a public hearing on it when we think we're done.
Yeah, sorry, I mean,
Yes,
like the sawmill itself.
Oh, no,
temporary is that?
Land use regulations and permits run with the land. So if the DRB grants a permit for a new sawmill, for example, or if they grant a permit for conditional use approval for a wood processing operation, that permit runs with the land and with the restrictions that are in the permit, and it continues forever until such time as someone tries.
Subject to the restrictions set on it by the DRB.
So I was just thinking about the other conversation that we're having around what's the ADUs, right? We're trying to encourage people to build ADUs within 400 feet. And if we're building these sawmills, just thinking about not impeding on the neighbor's ability then to build an ADU at some point later as well.
Yeah, and there are landowners. There's a whole history of, for example, the right to farm in Vermont, and about people who have a subdivision is built on a piece of land that's adjacent to an active dairy farming operation, for example, and they, their brand new house gets plunked down. It's 200 feet from a manure pit. And they're downwind most of the time, and all of a sudden they say, "Wait a minute, we didn't know there was a farm next door." I don't know why they didn't know, but they didn't do their homework. But
the farm was there first.
The farm was there first, and they, the farmer has a right to continue his farming operation, and the people who come in don't have a right to make the farmer stop farming. All of the things equal. So, and similar things come up with forestry. If somebody has an active woodlot that's being managed for timber harvesting, and they're cutting wood and they're maybe milling it on site, if somebody moves in next door, they don't have a right to stop that because, Vermont law respects a right to continue forestry and traditional uses. So, what we're talking about here is refinement in the situation where there would be conflicts between a new wood processing operation and nearby residences. And we're saying we want to enable reasonable restrictions on a new sawmill or new wood processing operation that respect the rights of nearby property owners.
Right. I understand your point, but I think the example would be exactly the opposite, right?
Yeah.
You're an existing homeowner, right? This is a situation where you're saying, well, you have to be 200 feet away from the house, right? So the house is there preceding the sawmill. The sawmill is moving in, and now it's affecting the property owner who is there.
And as an adjoining property owner, you have a voice in this conditional use process. So you go to the DRB hearing, you're notified of it in writing, you go to the DRB hearing, you can say your piece and ask the DRB to impose whatever restrictions you think are appropriate. This proposed regulation is a template for what rules the DRB
almost a
should follow.
baseline, really.
Yeah, baseline expectations.
Yeah.
The DRB is free to tweak this. You know, they can interpret this as they see fit. They can choose to allow something, or they might choose to deny the permit.
Gordon,
So a couple things, with the 90 decibels, does that, since the town noise limit is 60 decibels, it's no more than 90 decibels for a 2-hour period in a 24-hour day. Is that the level of decibels that's going to be at the property line for the wood processing operation? Is it 90 with everything else is 60?
You put your finger right on a problem that I couldn't solve in drafting
Right.
this.
Right.
Because, you know, there's actually two different.
Well, because it's gonna come up.
Yeah, it'll come up. There's two different noise standards already.
Right.
There's one in the nuisance ordinance, and then there's one in our land use regs.
Mhm.
And you know, it's pretty. I think I don't know what a typical sawmill generates, but I'm guessing. And I think Bart brought this up as well, that it's going to be way more than 60 decibels.
My wood processing, at 50 feet, it's 75 decibels with
Okay.
two of the same meters right next to each other.
Okay.
At 200 feet, it's 39 decibels.
Okay.
So, and that's straight down my driveway with no trees, no trucks, no nothing blocking it. It's set on the stand. But the thing is it's hard to, as when I went through all this with the DRB last year in fighting it, one of the members had a good point. Because I asked if they wanted me to get a professional sound measurement done, and she's like, "No, honey, it's all in the way the wind blows." Tuesday, the wind could be blowing north wind at 40 miles an hour, and they're going to hear it at like 80 or 90 decibels. And the next day, it's going to be blowing south, and they're going to hear it at 10 decibels. So, like, I like Bart's thing. I think it, you know, with the setback from the dwelling where people reside, I think that's a good thing to go, because I'm 400 feet right now to where I would set up if it was a 300 setback from a lot line, and that sets me right in the middle of a really murky swamp, and then you've got wetlands issues and all that. So where, I can't remember her name, did like 2 meetings ago, she had said, you know, if we have like 500 feet for these setbacks and stuff, is it going to be even accessible with a log truck or anything like that to supply people with firewood and stuff? And you know, with my personal property, my house is probably 500 feet from Dave and Pam Sills' house, our neighbors. But then you got Danny Clayton with like at least 13 or 1400 feet on the other end of my 55 acres. And so that's why I think a setback from a dwelling would be better than a setback from a property line, because if in those circumstances where it's reversed, where you've got 2 houses that are complete opposite of each other, you know, that noise, you're not even gonna hear the noise, especially with foliage coming out now. And I did some spring cutting for my sugaring operation, just to compare the two in the noisiest part of winter where sound is the most incredible compared to when it's the most deadened. You know, I'm 75 to 80 decibels at 275 feet. In the crack of winter, where the same spot in the middle of summer is 38, 39 decibels. So it's all in the foliage. I'm only summertime cutting anyway, because it's too hard on hydraulics and the systems themselves. So, you know, but I wanted to say, you know, I appreciate the effort that all you guys have brought to this. And Larry, I see your sigh when you were looking for a vote last meeting and stuff. And I just want to say that as a resident trying to actually get a permit for something and have the opportunity to do it, I appreciate all your insight from other towns and bringing all that knowledge together to make this possible, because it's very frustrating as a tax-paying resident not to even be able to put in for a permit for this. So I appreciate all you guys for doing that. And I think, you know, this draft I was the most impressed with. You know, the hours of operation are great, you know, especially with kids. I don't even get out the door till 9 o'clock some days and stuff. And you know, I think that the setbacks are good. The decibel level is good. You are going to get kickback from neighbors anywhere you go. But I do know of 2 or 3 other people that are excited about this progress, because they do realize that there is going to be a firewood shortage in this town at some point, and that we need to support it and take care of it. So
I have a proposal to finalize this, Larry. I'm curious for your thoughts. One is, I think we take what we have, subject with 2 little caveats, send it to Charlie
There you go.
for his final, like, hey dude, this is what we want to do.
Yeah.
Here's what I would add. I'm curious what other people think. It's not like Charlie's gonna watch this recording. I would add in a setback to the lot line in parentheses and say, we're considering this, thoughts. I would delete the 300 feet, put in XX and say, what are your thoughts?
Oh, there you go.
And I would ask his thoughts about what Gordon just highlighted about the 60 versus 90. And I think with that, we get Charlie's thoughts. We obviously don't have to do whatever he said, but I think it will be very valuable feedback. And then we finalize it
There you go.
next meeting.
Yeah.
Because I'd just be curious what Charlie fills in on his own.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
Done deal.
Okay.
So do that, and then what's after that? Come
Wrap
back.
this up.
Yeah,
next
be done
meeting.
with it.
Like, then we're done. Right?
Okay.
Like we take Charlie's, we all know where everyone stands. We get Charlie's numbers. We take a vote.
Yeah.
We send it to the select board.
Okay. Well, don't forget the hearing.
Well, that's
Still have to have a hearing.
We have a public hearing, then we send it to the select board.
Right, and we can, by the
Or
way,
would
we-
the select board do the public?
Who's just the
no,
whole?
we both have to do one.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
so,
we put this before the voters eventually.
well, the
It's up
select
to the
board,
select board.
the select board can decide it without taking it to the
It's
voters.
up to the select board.
It's up to them to decide how to do it,
I know they can.
because statute changed.
Policy has been, that changes to the regulations go before.
That's for the big wigs to decide, David.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm kidding, that's for the select board.
I did talk to,
It's on our end.
I did talk to select board members about that very topic, about process, and
Mhm.
it seems like there's political will on the select board to proceed with just having them make the decision.
Yeah,
Because they have the political capital, they're the elected representatives of the town,
yeah.
and they have the authority to make that decision. You know, it was a very different picture when I worked in Charlotte. The select board was very reluctant to use their political capital to make any decisions. They kicked everything to the voters, even things that were non-controversial. And it's a huge problem, because you have to then explain to a lot more people what it is you're trying to do and build consensus. Whereas if it's the select board just approving it, it's usually goes much quicker.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's how, all right. Yeah.
I want to say one more question for Larry. With things drying out real fast, and this is, with the winter we had, I usually only have about 10 or 15 people that have ordered cordwood at this point. I'm over like 55, 60 people already, because everybody used their last stick and then the twigs off the tree in the yard this winter. What is your thought from this point forward? Because I have a spot in Cambridge that I can cut. What is your thought with this being pushed to next meeting for kind of a finalization with the steps that we have in place to get forth to either a select board vote or an actual printed copy of the updated land use regulations?
It's years away, right?
No, I think it could be done on an accelerated timeline, but that probably means 3 to 4 months minimum.
Okay, yeah.
You know, I think it depends largely on how eager the select board is to take this up.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to be very eager.
Well, we'll see. I mean, we don't know. I mean, my guess, my gist, what I got from the select board is that they want to support the planning commission and doing the drafting work, getting materials, doing the public hearing, getting it to them for review in their own public hearing, and then, you know, making a decision. They don't want to drag things out.
Right.
So, I think that's what the mandate I was hired to carry out as well.
Yeah,
You know, to try to get stuff wrapped up and get it enacted, you know, on a fairly expedited timeline. But it takes a while. I mean, we have to have our public hearing. We may need to make some changes after we get the feedback from the public. If anybody comes to that, we then have to run it by the town attorney for legal review and make sure it's all copacetic with state statute. And then it goes to the select board. They do their public hearing, so that's going to probably at least be to the end of the summer. So if you have another place where you can
I'll be moving there.
fill those orders, you might want to go ahead.
That's all I needed to hear.
Because then you'd have to go up to the DRB again, and you know that whole
I've
process
already been
getting.
denied, so I can't even do it.
Well, if we change the statutes, you could, but
Yeah.
the
Well, right,
process of
but
getting
that's the only way I can even apply for another permit.
Yeah,
is
right.
With a changed statute.
and that takes.
Right,
couple
that's why I
months
was asking, because I know with Larry, it's going to be faster, but originally you guys were talking like 2 to 3 years on this. So,
Yeah.
Okay,
All right, can we move on to our?
yes, thank you.
Thanks, guys. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
first of all, can I get a motion? Are there any comments or questions on the April 17th minutes?
No.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Roy? Second? Second, Tim, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I'm gonna make a motion pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A3 that we go into executive session. Is there a second? Roy, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We're back out of executive session. I'm gonna make a motion that, the planning commission empower me to send an email to Brett Holden recommending the 3 folks we settled on in executive session to be nominated to the planning commission, subject to the select board's approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tim. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I think that takes us to our favorite motion of the evening, which goes to David. David, is there a motion you're interested in making?
Motion that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Bart, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Good meeting. Sorry we went late.